Today, I'm going to try to draw these plants in Krakow, Poland. And I started by marking these little ratios out, starting with the bottom of the glasses and roughly measuring up to the top of them. And then from there to the top of the leaves. And that was about the same ratio, maybe slightly taller. You can see in the reference that that's about right. From there, I wasn't exactly sure what would make the most sense to start with. I was a little worried I'd make the stems too long or the glasses too wide, so I went in lightly, just sketching the whole thing in, but starting with those glasses. I knew that they would require the most attention. Since we all pretty much know what these types of glasses look like, any off-kilter proportions could throw things off in a way I wouldn't have intended. So I tried to give myself some grace with these, letting those lighter lines guide where I'd eventually put my bolder, more decisive ones. Even before that, though, I finished up the rough sketching portion, casually placing the stems and the leaves. The stems, honestly, could have gone in last for all I care. They're by far the simplest component here, but the leaves definitely needed some attention. I sketched them in as rough silhouettes, unconcerned at this point which parts were on top or underneath, but seeing them almost as abstract shapes rather than leaves with dimensionality. I think all of this helped me get something on the paper without overthinking, and it made it possible to get the proportions reasonably correct before solidifying any one decision. The downside to this, or at least one downside, is that these initial sketches, as we know, can be difficult to see. But I mean that for you and for me in this case. I know that they're hard to make out at the beginning stage of the drawing, but they're almost as faint in person as they are on the screen. This drawing is pretty straightforward, so I don't know how I would go about lightly sketching something more complicated. I'm sure it's easy to lose your way as you go along, adding more and more here and there, but luckily, I don't have to worry about that here. As you can see, I'm committing to these spots, respectively, for my glasses, drawing bolder lines over where I sketched. And this is really nice because when I sketch those lighter lines, I'm creating this general area that's barely visible that I can use as a guide, but I'm not stuck with any of those placements. If the sketch makes the glasses, in this case, too narrow or too stout, I can alter that accordingly, choosing by way of my definitive lines where I want the edges of the glass to lie relative to the lighter ones. So here I'm actually broadening the glasses, if you can see that, because I made them too narrow in the sketch. The proportions still aren't perfect, but since I've laid down these bolder lines, I think it would be better for me to accept them as they are, as opposed to going back over them again and again with the pen until they're technically correct. These may not be exact representations of the glasses in front of me, they're certainly not, but I'd rather they look a little bit off than their edges be these deep, dark lines that don't exist in real life. Hopefully that makes sense. So for this drawing, I'm set up in the back of a coffee shop that we've visited pretty often. It's right around the corner from our apartment, and there are these big windows that let in a ton of light and look out at the basilica across the street. Actually, it's the same basilica that I drew a few days ago, a week ago, I don't know. Go watch that video. Just kidding. I know you already have. But we've been here a few times already at this coffee shop, and each time I knew that I wanted to draw something. I just never knew what. There's this sprawling backyard patio thing area that I've been eyeing, but today when I saw that this room was empty, which was odd because it's normally packed with people, I kind of just sauntered in to see if I could find somewhere to set up. And luckily, there were a few things of interest on these windowsills. And also, they were conveniently placed next to a table and chairs just for me, I'm sure. So, yeah, I picked these two plants and just jumped right in. I chose these because I was drawn in by the delicate shapes of the stems, along with the transparency of the glasses, which admittedly I don't really know what to do with, and those big leaves on top. So yeah, the whole subject, obviously. I did waver for a second as I was filming the reference video because there's no movement going on in frame, and there couldn't be. Nothing happens here. It might as well be a photo. I considered framing this so you could see out the window, but I think the exposure would have been affected. And at the end of the day, the subject is the subject. I don't want to do these all the time, but if I'm going to get better, I'm going to have to include some of these every once in a while. I'm sure no one cares as much as me. In fact, I'd venture to guess that no one cares full stop, but I don't know, some percentage of this series is, for the creative outlet of it all. So making something nice to look at is an important part of the process, at least for me. Okay, so now that I've made my way back up to these leaves, I'm having to look at them differently than I was before. I still want to ignore the part of my brain that thinks it knows what leaves are supposed to look like, but it's during this stage that I need to think less about the overall silhouette and more about the specific shapes that I'm seeing. So for example, if you look at the leaf second to the right, the one that's underneath the other middle leaf, the shape that makes up the area where you can see its underside kind of resembles a teardrop. So I will try to keep that in mind. um, and I'll try not to forget the overall shape of that leaf, which loosely resembles a cylinder if you look at it. If I glanced at the reference and had to draw it from memory, I, I would probably have drawn it a lot wider than you see here. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that. But even as I look up and down at this leaf, I take what looks so clearly like that teardrop and unintentionally add this dramatic downward hook on the right. As for the rest of the leaves, none of them are wildly off, but because my shading is lacking, they lose their depth. For instance, the leaf all the way to the right is looking flat, like it's facing directly forward instead of skewed off to the right side of frame. I've mentioned it before, but I think the best thing about doing all of this whole series, the most fruitful part is probably watching the mistakes happen. Had I drawn these plants with their undoubtedly IKEA-made glasses without photographing them for reference, I might look at my final drawing and give myself more praise than maybe I deserve. But being able to see the contrast here before my eyes, I hope will have a positive effect on my overall learning process. Also, as we near the end of this one, let's go off on a little tangent. I have been thinking a lot about what I might want as I march down this path that is learning how to draw. I'm aware that my amateur position comes with its fair share of ignorance, so I know that when I talk about goals or feelings about the process, it may come from an experientially naive perspective, but it's the only one I have. And working and thinking and talking through the process is the only way to grow out of it. So while I hold that acknowledgement in one hand, I can weigh it against the things I hold in the other, like my aspirations or opinions. For example, I believe that I'd like to be capable of drawing everything well, or well enough. I think it'd be nice to be able to sit down anywhere and draw whatever I see. And my approach to this process should, and I hope does, reflect that. And yet, when I weigh it against my own immaturity as it pertains to drawing, it forces me to contend with the possibility that in a year or two or whatever, I'll actually prefer specialization instead. Okay, give me a second. I can't know what I will want, but I suppose I can know what I do want right now. So, with all the qualifying out of the way, the current me thinks he would like to be able to draw everything. I'd like to be more of a generalist than a specialist. And I think that this channel, in conjunction with the other parts of my life, is proof of that. So while I'd like to be really good at drawing little plants in glasses, like these right here, I also want to be able to draw buildings and cars and bicycles and people, which might mean that I'm not as good at any one of them. And maybe that's okay with me, at least for present me. Okay. So let's look at the drawing. Not terrible, but definitely lacking some soul. I think proportionally, these worked out really well. The leaves, sure, they could use a lot more love, but overall, I'm not too dissatisfied with this one, especially the glasses. They're wrong in a million ways, but they still look like glasses. So, what do you think? Let me know. Drop a comment in the comment section. I'd really appreciate it. And I appreciate you for watching. Genuinely, thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.